Welcome to Tombstone's Takes. I am Tombstone. I am a librarian, and I like to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and interesting about books. Today, I'm coming at you with a non-spoiler review for Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. Now, this book is a sequel to last year's My Heart is a Chainsaw. I just did a non-spoiler review for that book. I'll link a description to that up there. Now, Don't Fear the Reaper doesn't come out until February, so you might ask why I'm doing a review so early. Well, after reading my ARC, the Advanced Reader's Copy, I felt like I needed to get this review out there so that I can keep my thoughts fresh, I can keep them up to date, and I can give you the best review possible. Let's start with what you need to know. In this second installment of the Lake Witch trilogy, Jade Daniels returns to Proofrock. She's been in some legal trouble from the events that occurred in My Heart is a Chainsaw. She returns during the winter's biggest whiteout. The snow is coming down, and she just so happens to come back during the week where the nation's deadliest serial killer, Dark Mill South, yes, his name is Dark Mill South, is being transported across state lines. Well, as you can imagine, things go bad when you're driving in a snowstorm, and Dark Mill South escapes. And where do you think he ends up? Yes, that's right, Proofrock. And when the bodies start hitting the floor, who's there to help out? Jade Daniels. But she's calling herself Jennifer now, and she's not the only one who knows about slashers. Having said that, let's dive into the good of this book. Now, I had a number of things that I liked about this book, and so I'm going to give them to you in order. First is Randy Meeks would tell you in Scream 2.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy.
The body count is bigger, the deaths are more elaborate, and there's more gore. Carnage, candy. Second, the second good thing that I found about this book is that it has multiple point of views. My Heart is a Chainsaw mostly came from Jade's point of view, and you saw the events unfold through her eyes. This book happens to have multiple point of views, and it ends up doing a number of things for the book. One of those things that it does is that it helps clarify the events of the first book. Something that I found happened with many of the reviews of My Heart is a Chainsaw is that people found the end of the book to be a little bit ambiguous. They weren't exactly sure what was going on. And the multiple points of views that occur in this book are often from characters who were there at the climax of My Heart is a Chainsaw. And what it does is it helps to clarify and for the reader to understand exactly what was happening at the end of the last book. Another thing that the multiple points of view of this book does is that it helps you learn to, at the very least, understand where some of the characters are coming from. And once you understand that point of view, it gives you an emotional attachment to some of the characters. You like them better, you're more invested in who they are, and once you're more invested in who you are, you can be more scared. You can be more scared. Yes, I give you permission to be more scared when it's appropriate, when you think that the killer might be there coming after your character. 3, like I said before, Jade's not the only one to understand slashers in this particular book. Now we have a number of people who are infatuated with the genre. And instead of the Slasher 101 chapters, the papers that we get giving us a history of what slashers are about from Jade's point of view, this time we're getting a number of history papers many of them exploring the urban legends of Proofrock and of some of the events that happened with Jade in My Heart is a Chainsaw. What this does, again, like with the multiple points of view, is it helps to clarify or call into question at certain times what exactly happened. What are the urban legends that you need to know from Proofrock? Do you really need to know about Stacey Graves? Do you really need to know about Camp Blood? Do you really need to know about Ezekiel's Cold Box? This is a good thing that we're getting a new set of Slasher 101 pages. I think in the book, Stephen Graham Jones called them Slasher 102. 4, like I said earlier, having the multiple points of view gives you extra characters to root for. But I want to go back to that for a second. In my viewing history with slashers, one of the things that I noticed is that the moment that you like a character, the minute that that happens, you can almost bet your life that that person's done for. Person's a goner. If the character's a cool character, they're done. They're toast. The exception to that rule might be with Scream, where you have Dewey and Gale and Sidney pretty much surviving for most of the original films. But that seems to be an outlier with slasher films. So by giving us more characters to like and to root for, what it does is it ups the ante. It makes it so that Stephen Graham Jones can give us a few more scares. And he does, especially as the body count rises. There's a lot more bodies dying in elaborate ways, just like I said earlier, carnage candy. Now, the fifth good thing is that by upping the body count and by giving us more people to root for, Stephen Graham Jones is making this book a lot more accessible. The nuance that he used in the first book and the slow pace turned off some readers because they wanted the carnage candy to be happening right away. That's what this book does. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that there's a lot of readers who pick up this book and find that this is the way that My Heart is a Chainsaw should have started. I happen to absolutely adore the first book, and I love this one, but I do feel like this one's a little bit more accessible, and it's going to be a lot more accessible to people who enjoy slasher films.
Let's get down to business. The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel. You know, cash in on all the movie murder hoopla. So it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel.
Now, let's move on to the bad. Just like the first one, I didn't say this in my review of the first one, but I do realize that this was one of the weaknesses of the book. So just like the first one, at times there's a little bit too much going on. You need to remember in both of these books, you need to parse out exactly what's happening. You need to remember the names of all the people in town. You need to remember how certain slasher events in movies correspond with the events that are happening in the book. You have a number of urban legends about Proofrock and that area that you need to know. And keeping all of these details straight, especially when the supernatural events start to occur, can become a little bit hard, and it can become a little bit tedious to remember what all those things were, which makes it hard to understand exactly what's going on. So there is some nuance like there was in the first one, although it's a little bit less. But at the same time, there's still a lot going on. I don't understand how Stephen Graham Jones can keep it all straight in his head, but he has. I happen to like everything that's going on. I loved it. I think it's absolutely fun. But I do realize that for some people, it's going to be a bit difficult to keep all of those various storylines and threads straight and to untangle them in their mind by the time the end comes. Plus, readers aren't moviegoers, and if you open up a thread about some paranormal activity, readers want to know what it means and want an explanation for that so that they know that it isn't a red herring meant to only misdirect them. Moviegoers, on the other hand, might be a little bit more apt to just take at face value the implication that there's a supernatural phenomenon occurring that might help Michael Myers to stay alive, or to be able to wander through town, or to survive getting shot multiple times. So, because readers are different than moviegoers, sometimes a little bit too much going on might bog down the story for them. Now let's move on to the ugly. Don't Fear the Reaper is an ugly title, especially in comparison to My Heart is a Chainsaw. My Heart is a Chainsaw was such a glorious and beautiful metaphor for the character of Jade Daniels. It truly encapsulated who she was and all the struggles that she went through in the book. Don't Fear the Reaper doesn't have quite the same impact. They do talk a little bit about Reapers and their connotations in slasher films, and we do see a scythe play a part in the book. But other than that, Don't Fear the Reaper just doesn't hit home in the same manner as My Heart is a Chainsaw did for me as a title. I may be biased as far as that's concerned, but I absolutely love the title of that book. This one is just okay. Yeah, you guys should do better with the title in the third installment of this book. Now on to the interesting. It's interesting to see how Jade's character has developed in this book. She returns to Proofrock and she's calling herself Jennifer, her birth name, not Jade. And we see how she's progressed from the events of My Heart is a Chainsaw, but we also see the development of some other characters. In some ways, it feels like Jade might be able to create her own Scooby Gang, maybe for the third installment. I don't think that that's really a spoiler, but it's also interesting to see how those characters have now become more knowledgeable about slashers in the event of the first book. But it's also interesting because it highlights how the first book was really about Jade and it was about her own personal struggles, whereas this book really becomes about the community and their struggles and how the community struggles at this particular time really essentially needs Jade in a way that they felt like they didn't need her before. And maybe not need is a bad word, but maybe it would be in a way that the community had failed her before. And so now it's interesting to see how the tables have turned a little bit. Having said that, I think that this is a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it. There were things that I loved about this book that I loved better than the first book. I loved the multiple points of view. I loved how the murders in this book did in some ways mirror slasher films a little bit more than they did in the first book. I loved how Stephen Graham Jones wove in all the new multiple points of view. I believe that it gave us an emotional attachment to many of the characters that we didn't have before, like I said earlier. Or if we didn't have an emotional attachment to them, I feel like we at least understood them. I feel like this book is upped to the game as far as the slashers that occur. And I feel like Stephen Graham Jones is every bit as clever as he was in My Heart is a Chainsaw. The biggest detractor for the book for me is that it really does have a lot going on. Sometimes it is hard to keep those threads straight and not let them get tangled up too much. For me, that last point is the biggest detractor of the book. So I'm going to give this book 4 tombstones. I'm going to give it 4 tombstones. I'm going to give it a tombstone for the prose. I absolutely loved the prose. I'm going to give it a tombstone for its entertainment value. I'm going to give it a tombstone for its ability to discuss characters in a meaningful way, in a meaningful, heartfelt way, especially for those people who are survivors of trauma, as he did in the first book. And I'm going to give it 4 stars for the fourth tombstone. I'm going to give it for its overall culmination of not only entertainment, but being a rewarding book and when I say rewarding, I mean if you work at it like you do for My Heart is a Chainsaw, that you're going to find not only some depth, but some entertainment value and some Easter eggs as far as its connections to the first book that are just truly awesome. Now, I hope that you love this book as much as I did. I think that we need the 3rd installment of the Lake Witch trilogy right now. And this book hasn't even come out yet. It's not going to come out till February. But like I said, I wanted to get my thoughts out while they're still fresh in my mind. I'm thankful to NetGalley and the publishers for providing me an arc for this book. And tell me in the comments what you thought of My Heart is a Chainsaw, or if you get the opportunity to read this book, tell me what you like about this one. Tell me what connections you've made between My Heart is a Chainsaw and different slasher films, or Don't Fear the Reaper and different slasher films. Let's review Randy Meeks's rules, and you've got to keep those things at the forefront of your mind when you're reading this. What are the rules?
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy.
I hope you enjoyed this review of Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. Maybe I'll go into a little bit more of the different kinds of connections with slashers at a later date. But if you like what I do, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Click on another video, or watch the one about My Heart is a Chainsaw. And as always, get to reading.